Welcome to the Global Philosophy of Religion project at the University of Birmingham, run by Professor Yujin Nagasawa. We at Closer to Truth are thrilled to collaborate. Professor Seyyed Hossein Nasr, originally from Iran, is a world-renowned Islamic philosopher. He is University Professor of Islamic Studies at George Washington University. Hossein, it's great to see you again, and let's start with Islamic metaphysics. You claim that there would be no agnostics around, and I assume no atheists, if one were only able to teach metaphysics to everyone. And you've written, there is no issue more central to Islamic philosophy, and especially metaphysics, than wujud, at once being and existence in itself, and its relationship to bahaya, which is quiddity or essence. So please develop this foundational concept.
First of all, it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you a few minutes again, especially from Birmingham, where I delivered the Cadbury lectures many years ago. I spent several weeks there. I hope all is going well and faring well. I'm very glad you've started this program at such a high level. The world needs more than anything today a principial knowledge, which it has neglected for such a long time. This brings me to the response to the first part of the question that you asked of me. Yes, I did write that if everyone could be taught metaphysics, there would be no agnostics and, of course, no atheists. But that cannot be done. By metaphysics, I did not mean simply that part of philosophy which deals with the principles of knowledge and things like that, as we learned in modern study of Western philosophy, but metaphysics in the original sense, the science of ultimate reality, of what in Islam is called ma'rifah or irfan, or in Hinduism, jnana. And it has to do actually with intelligence in its medieval Latin sense, not the modern sense of intelligence. That is an innate faculty in human beings which is able to know the truth. Now, human beings are made in such a way that not everyone has every aspect of his intelligence or other faculties developed in the same way. I may be able to speak French, you may be able to speak Dutch, somebody else may be very good at horseback riding. The different human gifts that people have. And some people are gifted for metaphysics in such a way that their intelligence, once it confronts this kind of knowledge, it understands it and it accepts it. And if everyone were like that, there would be no agnostics, because this knowledge, once you have the proper intelligence with based on the principle of adequatio in medieval Latin, the adequation of the knowing substance, knowing instrument to that which is known, instrument of knowledge, of course, that we're known, is there. Once one has that, then one is able to assert the truth with certainty of the divine reality. Now, we have that case, just let me, I don't want to drag this on too long, but we have that case very much in other sciences. Here, you and I are sitting together. We have studied for years in our own subject. I happen to have studied mathematics for several years at MIT, but forget about that. Both of us may be very good in, let's say, in the humanities, but we may not be good in astronomy. And in other professions, in the modern world, it's very interesting. People accept the authority of fields of which they know nothing, and they're not competent in knowing that field. You and I trust what some physicists say about quantum mechanics without having studied quantum mechanics for many years. But once it comes to the science of God, the supreme science, the queen of all sciences according to the medieval classification of sciences, then everybody claims that either everybody must know this or it's false. If this claim were made for other sciences, there would be no science in the modern world. Here in the city of Washington, where I live, there are no more than 500 people who understand the laws of quantum mechanics. And the major change that comes about, like has been coming about in the last couple of decades, It's not known by people walking on M Street, but nevertheless they accept it because they accept that authority. Whereas what has been lost in the modern world, that authority has been lost in Islamic civilization, as in Hindu civilization, as in classical Chinese civilization, as in pre-modern Western civilization. That authority was accepted by the rest of society for those who had that kind of knowledge. In India, not everyone is a Janani, not everyone knows supreme knowledge. But Hinduism is still out of its traditional part that survives to this day, is such that the rest of society has confidence in what they say, in the same way that you and I have confidence in what some chemist says about the medicine that we go to a drugstore and buy and put it to our mouth. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. Otherwise, we would not do it. That's what I had in mind. Now, to the second part of the question, as far as Islamic philosophy is concerned, we have two major expressions of metaphysics, science of the real, in Islamic intellectual universe. One is an Islamic philosophy, which deals with on a more rational basis in the case of early Islamic philosophy, of the school of Avicenna and the like, and then with the school of illumination of Sohrawardi and later on Mullah Sadr and others, it becomes much more metaphysically inclined and weds, in a sense, a ratiocination and intellection and illumination together as means of attaining philosophical knowledge. Then you have the Sufi tradition within Islam, in which the centrality of this issue is always present. The highest form of Sufism, as expounded by great masters such as Ibn Arabi, or in poetry by Jalaluddin Rumi and Shabastari and others, these masters deal with metaphysics at the highest level, even beyond rational discourse, and even criticize rational philosophers, not for what they say, but what they do not say, and therefore negate. And therefore, they, in a sense, transcend their perspective, and they are very, very clear that metaphysics is evident in the nature of reality. Let me end this first question that you have asked me with this remarkable poem by one of my favorite poets of the Persian language, the great metaphysician, a Sufi, Sheikh Mahmud Shabastari. And I will quote one verse of Persian poetry for you. It says, Basi nadan ki o khurshid taban be nur sham joyat dar biyaban. There's many a fool who is seeking the luminous sun in the desert while holding a candle in his hand, which is one of the most blatant attacks against rationalism, you might say. So you have both of these expressions in the Islamic world, but all together in Islamic civilization. Although there have been opposition by some schools of law, by some schools of theology, and so forth, but the mainstream Islamic intellectual universe has preserved metaphysics on the highest level. And today in the world, it's really the two civilizations of Hinduism and Islam, in which metaphysical knowledge, as transmitted traditionally, is still so easily available. Now, it's not totally absent. In Eastern Christianity, in parts of Taoism, which have survived the communist regime in China and areas around China and so forth. I've met some people, some Taoist masters. But by and large, the two great traditions globally, in which this science and metaphysics of which you first speak are preserved, are the Islamic and the Hindu.
So within Islamic philosophy, what's this relationship that you say is so critical between being, wujud, and essence, or mahiyat?
Islamic philosophy, classical Islamic philosophy, is based on several major concepts and also distinctions between concepts which complement each other. Of these, none is more important than what you just cited, wujud and mahiyya. Wujud is translated into English as both being and existence. And it's very significant that in English you have both words, one that comes from Anglo-Saxon being and the other from the Latin existere, which means pull out of, and it says the ground of being, which is very significant. In Arabic, the two are the same, but the meaning, both distinct meanings are there in the word wujud. And in Arabic, the word wujud, W-U-J-U-D, is related to the word to discover, to be conscious of, to find, wajada, wajdan, and so forth. And as I've noted in the book Knowledge of the Sacred, it's also related to the word, to ecstasy, wajd, because to be united with being, to be, to fully be, implies both consciousness, being, and ananda, as the Hindus say, or joy, or ecstasy. Anyway, Mahia, which was coined actually in Islamic civilization and came into the European languages as the word quiddity, Q-U-I-D-D-I-T-Y, which is known to all scholars of Western philosophy, especially medieval philosophy, cited many times by St. Thomas Aquinas and others. Quiddity comes from the Latin quid est, what is it? Now, this question, which is the root of the word quiddity, answers what you the question that you posed to me. When we have the experience of anything, we see an object, we hear a sound, we kick a rock on the street, anything on any level, we can ask two fundamental questions of it. Is it? What is it? These are two very distinct questions. The human intelligence is created in such a way as to be able to pose both questions and distinguish one from another. If I say a unicorn, the answer is it might be no, it doesn't even exist. It's imagination or mythology. But what is it that you can describe very carefully? An animal with a single horn on the top of his nose and so on and so on. So the two questions are distinct from each other. And from that comes the two fundamental concepts of wujud and mahiyya. And Islamic philosophy believes that everything in the world comes into the realm of existence through a wedding of wujud and mahiyya, being or existence, and quiddity. The word essence, one should be careful, is sometimes used, but it's one has to be very careful how to use it, because the word essence is also used for the essence of God, and that where it has different meaning. The famous French philosopher of medieval studies and medieval philosophy, especially Etienne Gilson, the foremost scholar in Europe produced the last century in its own medieval philosophy, has a book in French called L'Existence et l'Essence, entitled Wujud and Mahiyya, dealing with the significance of this in the Western, both theological and philosophical tradition of the Middle Ages, and then lasting into the modern period. It dropped out of the central role that it had in Western philosophy, actually with modern philosophy, where we can see already with Descartes, who had studied, in fact, Thomism and traditional philosophy in Catholic schools, but that changed the whole gamut and perspective of philosophy, is the father of modern philosophy. But we see that still in the imprint of it in some of his writings, but gradually disappears from the scene. But that's what it means.
So in Islamic philosophy, how do you define ultimate reality? You've talked about God as the absolute and the divine infinity, which is an interesting phrase. And also, when God is ultimate reality, that in some sense God contains all possibilities. I'm fascinated by that word, possibilities.
This is a very profound, of course, central metaphysical question. The word reality, of course, in English comes from the Latin res, is a very fundamental word, one of those words which you cannot clarify by appealing to another word, you might say. Everything makes it more complex. It's a central word, like the word water. If you try to say water, oxygen, and hydrogen, excuse me, and so forth. You have no knowledge what oxygen is, what hydrogen is, but you have knowledge of what water is. The same is true with reality. We have an innate, intuitive, intellectual, and also mental and even psychological grasp of what is real. But at the same time, it's the most difficult thing to try to define, because to define it, you have to have recourse to something that, in fact, is less real than the ultimate reality, philosophically speaking. And so the great philosophical traditions, metaphysical traditions, have alluded to it. That's why also in the West, you have the cataphatic as well as the apophatic theology. That is a theology of negation as well as theology of positive categories. You have the same in Islam, but reality is such that it cannot be defined, because when it's defined, you delimit, you put a limit upon it. And ultimate reality is that which is limitless. And so my own great teachers in Iran, with whom I studied traditional philosophy, they said we take the reality of anything, take away from it every limitative condition. It's black, not white. Square, not round. Wood, not wood. In this room, not in this room. In the morning, not in the morning. And take away every condition. What remains is the reality itself. That is something which is beyond all the conditionality that defines ordinary reality for us externally. And so the ordinary reality outside is really a kind of image or reflection or congealing of the ultimate reality. All kinds of symbols have been used by various metaphysicians. For example, I have used metaphysics called a symbol actually of water and ice. If this world, you have concrete reality, you hit your head against the wall. That's ice, but ice is nothing but water. Where if you hit your head, you don't hurt your head at all. It's water that has been congealed. And so you have the whole idea that comes the ultimate reality of transcendence, movement away from the ultimate reality into the relative reality in which we live today, and to the difficulty of understanding that absolute reality from which the relative reality comes. Having said all of this, nevertheless, it is possible to also speak about ultimate reality in cataphatic terms. You can say that the highest metaphysical understanding in Islam, that God or ultimate reality is absolute, infinite, and the supreme good. You have an allusion to that in Plato, but doesn't make the question of infinity so clear. The early Greek philosophers, except for certain Pythagoreans who alluded to it, do not turn to the question of infinity as a concept as you have in Hindu philosophy and Islamic philosophy. But anyway, it is that's the way to approach it. The reality, which excludes everything, absolute, includes everything by being infinite. And that's why beyond the early categories, ordinary categorizations created by our mind. It cannot be categorized in this either or manner, and it's a supreme good while being above and beyond the duality of good and evil. Because in this world of manifestation, manifestation implies opposition, implies duality. And good is always seen and experienced in opposition to evil. And evil is the opposition to good. But the good, the supreme good, as Plato would say, is above also this duality and this dichotomy. Now, I think you had another question besides that?
Let's get to the embedding of all possibilities in this.
Yes, oh yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, we come to this question of all possibility. This is a very difficult metaphysical term in mainstream Western philosophical thought. And it was revived metaphysically, most of all by Friedrich Schur, the great German metaphysician of the last century. All possibility means that the root of the reality of all things is in the hands of God, you must use the theological terms. The Quran says, بِيَدِهِ مَلَكُوتُ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. That is, in his hand are the ontological principles of all things, you might say. Now, everything that is possible, that could exist, already has its roots in the divine reality. So the divine reality is the all possibility. It has to do with the question of infinity. Of course, there's a very critical and difficult to understand issue metaphysically concerned with this, because the all or the infinite implies also that possibility which the negation of itself. And that's where the world begins. That is, you have that, for example, in the Kabbalah, very beautifully explained in the doctrine in which the divine inhales, you must create a space for the world to be created, for the world to exist. It said the divine negates himself. This is another way of saying it metaphysically. And Jewish metaphysics in the Kabbalah has a lot of explanation, very beautiful explanation about this matter. And also we have it very, very fully explained in Islam. And this possibility must not be confused with those who know Islamic philosophy with the word mumkin, which means possible, potential being. Mumkinat, creatures are called mumkinat. This all possibility has to do with the root of all mumkinat, all that can exist, all contingent beings in the divine reality itself.
What are
getting into deep waters here? I know this is not a subject for ordinary television discourse, what we're doing, but you asked me this question. I have to answer it in honesty and try to clarify it for you.
Absolutely. No, we're at a very high level, so this is exactly right. So given that, what are the specific attributes in a positive sense of God, Allah, the divine reality? In specific, how do the 99 names in Islam articulate with the philosophical ideas in the Judeo-Christian tradition, such as God's incorporality, timelessness, omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, all those philosophical terms, how do they intersect with the 99 names?
The 99 names of God revealed in the Quran are a really very special miracle of the Islamic revelation. In every revelation, God has revealed certain of his names. And in the Lord's Prayer, we say, hallowed be thy name. The Christian prayer that Christ uttered, hallowed be thy name. That name of God manifests itself in various religious universes through various names and qualities and attributes, which are called Asma wa Sifat, the various names of God, various qualities of God. in Islam, going back to the Quran, you have 99 names which are also attributes of God. And they're usually divided into names of majesty and the names of beauty. Al-Jalal wal-Jamal. Names of majesty and names of beauty. Because God has an aspect of majesty. He's the ruler. He's a judge. He's a creator. And so on and so on. But he also has an aspect of beauty, of mercy. He's merciful. He's kind. He bestows beauty upon what he creates. And these two are balanced. Many Orientalists have accused Quran of being just a religion of Jalal, you might say, fear of God. That's not at all true, of course, because the Quran itself refers oftentimes to the love of God and beauty. And beauty plays a very, very important role, of course, in Islamic spirituality and Sufism, and is associated with goodness. The word of goodness and beauty is the same in Islam.
Mm.
To do something good is to do something beautiful. And to be good is also to be beautiful. I mean, inwardly. Because the outward is we have not created, but it's even reflected outwardly. A saintly person always has an aspect of physical beauty about her or about him that radiates. That's obvious. Anyway, so the 99 names of God are a key for us to reach God. And the Quran says, وَلِلَّهِ الْأَسْمَاءُ الْحُسْنَى عُدُوا بِهَا. To God belong the most beautiful names, is the plural, asma. Call him by those names. And so the daily life of Muslims is interspersed with calling God by these various names, but especially in Sufism, the whole method of spiritual realization is based upon becoming aware of the names and the supreme name of God, and to live accordingly, to have it live in us, and to have us live in it ultimately. So it's extremely central and important. All of the names that, for example, you have of God in both the New Testament and the Old Testament are also found in those 99 names. For example, except the special reference in Christianity to the filial relation, which God is called the Father. Our Father that art in heaven, the Lord's Prayer. This, what we call Obowa Bonowa, the father-son relationship, does not exist in Islam, because Islam is based on the supreme essence of God and not a manifestation of God. Because son, father implies the relationality, and the divine essence is above all relations. And so there's this difference between the Islamic and Christian perspective on this particular issue. But putting that aside, God is merciful in the Bible. God is just. He's sometimes revengeful even. You have that also in the Quran. God can take revenge for false actions. He's not only merciful, he's also just. But the plethora of names, this whole canopy of names that you have in the Quran, are not found, all of them, in the Bible. But the names found in the Bible, except for these few exceptions, especially the name of the Father, God is the Father, or of course God is the Son, because that's part of the Trinity. Except that, in general, Islam contains in one way or another either direct relation or reference to the names of God in Judaism and Christianity.
Why is the divine infinity so essential to an adequate doctrine of the nature of God?
The answer is because God is infinite. But if you were to limit God to the finite, as you know, William James and certain American philosophers and theologians spoke about that, about the finite God in order to expand the question of evil. But once you have that, then you can no longer have monotheism.
How can we try to get more out of this concept of infinity beyond that one word? What are the meanings of it within Islam, and how would they relate to the so-called perfect being theology within Christianity of God being all knowledgeable, all knowing, all present, all good, all free? How do they articulate?
There are references by Christian mystics to God's infinite reality. So even when we say world without end, amen. The world without end is a reflection really of the divine reality which has no end. And so the idea that God is limitless, therefore infinite, although the word infinity is not always used, is very strong in traditional Catholic theology of the Middle Ages. You have that in St. Bonaventure, you have it in St. Thomas. It's not unique to Islam by any means, except that in ordinary Catholic theology, it's the personhood of the three hypostases, Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, that is mentioned. And the infinity of the divine essence of Usia is not mentioned except by certain mystics. But in mystical Christianity, even the experience of swimming in the infinite ocean of God, as Meister Eckhart would say, is present. And as a person like Eckhart, his experience of God as the infinite is very, very close to that of the Islamic Gnostics, Islamic mystics.
So, is it proper within Islam, as it is in Christianity, to describe God or Allah, divine reality, as a person, a personal being with personhood features like awareness and intent and will?
In Christianity and Islam, there is a little bit of difference in this, that ordinary Christians, when they say God, they mean the personal God, because the question, especially the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, three persons of the Trinity, this is more emphasized. And the Christian mystics, therefore, brought into a number of words into play, such as Gottheit in German, Godhead in English, Urgrund in German, the ground of being, and so forth, which was even used by Paul Tillich and certain modern Christian theologians, not only medieval ones. They brought that into play, but for ordinary Christians, God is person. Now, oftentimes it's written that there are certain religions which are completely impersonal and have no personal God, like in Taoism or Buddhism. I would not get into that discussion because that also has an answer. There's no total religious world without some aspect of divinity presenting itself as persona to humanity. But I would not get into that. As far as Islam is concerned, Allah, which is the name of the supreme name of God, Allah, is both personal and impersonal. In a sense, Allah is like Tao, the supreme Tao, mentioned in the first book of the Tao Te Ching. The Tao that can be named and not the Tao. I mean that supreme Tao. It's like Tao. It's the supreme principle, which is even above the I-Thou relationship and personal relationship. And at the same time, God is the supreme person whom you can address. God can be addressed by us. And here you have this interplay in Islamic mystical thought and practice between, on the one hand, the I-Thou relation, I and the Lord. When going back to the Quran, when God assembled not only Adam, but all the progeny of Adam, and for us that means myself as well, I'm living how many millennia afterwards, and asked, am I not your Lord? Alastu bi Rabbikum, using the word Rabb, which means Lord, one of the names of God that we also use in Christianity and Judaism. And everybody said, Bala, yes, we attested to God's lordship. The relationship between us as marbub, as creature, and God as Lord, which is an I-thou relation, to quote the famous saying of Martin Buber, God as thou, is there. But in Islam, God is also beyond that. All that's there. God is also beyond that. God is the supreme He, or the supreme I, both, but the supreme transcendence and supreme eminence, and beyond every category, including the category of personhood. So you have in Islam a combination of these two dimensions of divinity in the divine reality itself, in the supreme divine name Allah, which I said, Allah is at once transcendent, beyond all that can be said, and related to us. I can call upon Allah, not only upon the names, the other names of God. We can call upon the supreme name Allah, which in Arabic means God, with a capital G. And the word Ilah means God with a small g. So it corresponds very much to the word God or Deus, divinity in Latin languages. So this is a very important issue. I'm glad you brought it up. Again, you cannot not have certain supreme doctrines, spiritually or metaphysically, in every great tradition. So you do have in Christianity those who are precisely gone beyond the I-thou relationship, you might say, or become drowned in the ocean of divinity. And that not as many daring poems in Latin as there are in Arabic and Persian. So an example of it being Hallaj, for which he was put to death, the famous Persian Sufi who lived in Baghdad and was killed in Iraq. His tomb is near Baghdad, just outside of the town of Baghdad, who, because he uttered I am the truth with a capital T, and al-Haq, I am God, in a sense. A daring exposition, beautifully explained throughout the history of Sufism. And the Sufis take the other view, and they say anyone who does not say an al-Haq is not a good Muslim, because our ana, our I-ness, is at the center of our being, and at the center of that I-ness is God. So my I is God. It's not my nafs. It's not my carnal soul. It's not the ego with which I identify myself. The divine center, which in a sense permeates my whole being. And that's why it's so hard to get to the root of your own consciousness. You can't think back. You were 2 years old. What was there before? We can't do it. You cannot go back. I can go to origin on my fingers. There's a top and there's a bottom. I cannot do that with the consciousness itself, precisely because of that.
Please describe Sufism briefly, especially in its relationship to Islam in general. Is it accurate to characterize Sufism as Islamic mysticism or Islamic intensification?
The word mysticism is, but unfortunately, somewhat diluted and distorted during the last few centuries. Everybody who says anything psychological is supposed to call them mystic. But if you understand mysticism in its original sense, having to do with the divine mysteries, then yes, Sufism is Islamic mysticism. I always say to my students that the root of the word mysterium, or mystic, the word mystic, from where mysticism comes, has to do with the Greek verb mem, to keep silent, to just keep quiet. And we have this famous poem in Persian, which says exactly the same thing about Sufism. هر که را اسرار حق آموختند مهر کردند و لبانش دوختند. Whoever has been taught the divine mysteries, his lips have been sewn, and a seal has been put on his mouth, so he does not speak anymore. That's exactly mysticism. But considering what has happened in mysticism since the Middle Ages, its character changed completely, its uses changed completely. Medieval Christian mystics, or even to the Renaissance, such as St. John of the Cross, people like that, and the early Christian mystics, Dante, Meister Eckhart, and people like that, the whole German school of mysticism, is very, very similar to Sufism. And in that sense, Sufism could be called Islamic mysticism. But mysticism, having become what it has become, I usually do not use the word Islamic mysticism unless I have to, or in some context where the editor requires it. We use the word Islamic esotericism, the inner path, inner dimension of Islam, which what Sufism is. That's the answer to the second part of your question. Sufism is not an external revelation or external borrowing. It was revealed as part of the Quranic revelation to the Prophet. The root of Sufism is found in the descent of the Word of God by Gabriel into the heart of the Prophet. It's the same way that everything else, Islamic, divine law, ethics, and so forth, comes from that root, so does Sufism. And I don't care what Western Orientalists say. For people who are within the Sufi tradition, like myself, we always believe that the founder of Sufism is ultimately the Prophet himself. The word was not used, but the word Islamic law wasn't used at that time either in that sense. A lot of kalam, theology was not used. That doesn't mean anything. But the reality was there from the very beginning, and it grew over the centuries into a vast tradition of mysticism, one of the richest in the world, and being the esoteric dimension of the last global revelation, which is that of Islam. There have been no major revelations since Islam. Before you had Buddhism, you had Christianity, you had Manichaeism, you had this and that. Taoism, nothing after Islam of the dimension. I mean, it was small religious movements here and there, but nothing of a global dimension. This mysticism or Sufism, therefore, had the quality of incorporating onto itself, in a sense, certain elements of esoteric doctrines of other traditions before it, from Christian mysticism to Taoism, and everything in between. Everything in between. And that didn't mean it borrowed. No, not at all. But it had this integrated power. So when the Naqshbandi order went into India, one of the major Sufi orders, it incorporated certain forms of breathing from Hindu yogic practices. But those in Morocco did not. Those were not central to Sufism. But Sufism had this integrated power. And so you find this remarkable diversity of doctrine, of art, of practice in Sufism that is totally astounding. Just to hear music, from Sufi music in Jakarta to Sufi music in Rabat, and everything in between. Look at the diversity. Remarkable schools of music have been created. Calligraphy, architecture, all kinds of things that Sufism created, which I mention because those are things that everybody can see, those who do not understand the doctrines of Sufism itself. And therefore, Sufism remains a central reality, which is not something ancillary or added to Islam, but it's like the heart of the tradition. And it therefore, in a sense, feeds all of the limbs with a spiritual elan, and its weakening since the 19th century has a catastrophic effect upon the Islamic world. It's been opposed by both modernism and Wahhabism and the like, movements of the Salafi movements, these fundamentalist movements that arose in the 19th century, first in Arabia and then Egypt and elsewhere. And it's been opposed by them, but nevertheless, still a very vibrant tradition, very living, and perhaps of all the great mystical traditions of the world, the most accessible because certain forms of Hinduism are extremely inaccessible. Those which are accessible are oftentimes diluted. And Christianity is very, very difficult to get access to real esoteric teachings. That's why so many people in the West go to the East for this kind of instruction. All right, I think I've said enough. I thank you and I pray for you and all those who listen. And I hope that altogether we shall be able to regain the great heritage which our ancestors left us in the field of intellectuality and spirituality, and will help us make all of us better human beings, both for ourselves and for the world of creation, whose care is left in our hands and which we've dealt with so carelessly until now.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to doing this again as well.
God be with you, and I hope the program goes well, and keep me posted what you're going to do with it.
Of course. Okay, all the best.
Take care.